Marching through the world of statistical analysis. We're going to be looking in this particular chapter section on a couple of representations of how we might represent data. One of those is a histogram, which is what we see here on this slide here. And another is something called a box and whisker plot. And so if we've got some univariate data, some just data, we can represent or present this in a pictorial form, if you will. One of the ways, again, is using what is called a histogram. Now here we have on the screen 3 histograms, and we can use these to describe the data. Now let's look at this one in the middle. It's called a symmetric distribution. And the data is, we can see that is evenly distributed. It looks like what you may be familiar with, called a bell curve. And as we explore this area of statistical analysis, we'll get deeper and deeper into that. But right now, all we're going to do is we're going to learn how to create histograms using our TI-84 calculators, and also describe it. And we'll describe it as either symmetric or negatively skewed or positively skewed. Now, over here on the left, where it says negatively skewed distribution, we see that the majority of our data is on the right side, but that creates a tail, what we call a tail here, on the left. And so when we see a longer tail, if you look here on this symmetric, we really don't have a tail when they're both evenly distributed. But when we have a tail over to the left, we call that negatively skewed, which means most of the data is over on the right. And also, if we look at this particular one, a positively skewed distribution, well, it's the opposite. Most of the data is on the left, and we've got a tail on the right. So tail on the left, we're negatively skewed. That means most of the data is on the right. If we got a tail on the right, most of the data is on the left, and we call that positively skewed. And if it is evenly distributed, we call that a symmetric distribution. Now, in this particular exercise, we're asked to use a graphing calculator to construct a histogram for the data and use it to describe the shape of the distribution. And we're getting ready to move over to the calculator. And here we got a lot of data. I'm not going to read it all. I believe there's 36 points of data points in this data set, going from 18 all the way down here to 12. But hold on, we're moving to the calculator. We're going to enter this into one of our lists. Then we're going to use a stat plot. And specifically, we're going to choose a histogram, which you're going to see. We have to make some window adjustments in order to see it. And then we're going to describe it as to whether it's negatively skewed, positively skewed, or symmetric. Well, as promised, I'm over here on the calculator. Now, I have already entered the data that we saw on the previous slide. And again, one thing you always want to do, though, after you put it in L1, and remember, we go to Stat, we choose Edit, we enter in L1. We've got some previous videos that show us actually doing that. But if I scroll down here, I can see, hopefully, that my last piece of data includes item number 36. I hope so. And as a matter of practice, you want to make sure that your data in there is actually there, because you know the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. Now I want to create a histogram so that I can later describe it. And I'm going to first go to second y equals, or which is stat plot. And I want to turn it on. So I've got plot 1 sitting up here. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to hit enter again to turn it on. And then I'm going to go down to this second line where it says type. and I'm going over here to a histogram. Now, a histogram is really nothing more than a bar chart. We saw that on as we began to look at that. So I'm going to choose the histogram. I want to look at the histogram, and then I'm going to go zoom, and I'm going to choose option 9 down here, which is zoom stat. Zoom stat. And it's going to make some window adjustments so that I can see it. Now, I'm going to make a few little other window adjustments once I complete this, but let's hit zoom 9, and shazam, we see a histogram. Now, I got a little bit of data in that y equals. I'm going to clear it out right quick. Let's clear that. And I'm going to go down here and clear this. So let's go back to our graph. And there I see a histogram. Now, it looks like it might be a little bit skewed, but let me go in here and make a few little window adjustments. All right, so X minimum. Let's see here. What do I want to do to change this? Well, one thing I want to change is I didn't have any negative values, so I'm going to change that Y minimum to negative. And I may just, this is a little bit, I guess you would say, more of an art than it is a science. Let's see, Y minimum 6, that looks good. I'm going to just choose Y maximum. I'm going to just choose 39, clear out those decimals. And Y minimum, I'm going to say 11, clear out that decimal. Let's see what our graph looks like now. Okay, so it looks like it could be just a little bit on the skewed side. What's my scale on my window? Maybe I might want to change that a little bit. Scale. Yeah, I want to change that to 4 rather than 4.83. I'm just clearing out some of the decimals in my window setting. Okay. And I could probably call this one either way. It looks like it might have a little bit of a tail on the right, which would seem to indicate that maybe I've got a skewed distribution of some sort. But it also looks a little bit symmetric as well. I mean, I could make a case that that's positively skewed, but I could also make a case that that is more symmetric. It's not too far off. If I had a bell curve up here. Well, let's just call it symmetric, although I could make a case that it's positively skewed with a tail to the right. But that's how we create a histogram. Again, I enter the data into L1. I go in, I turn my stat plot on. I choose the type of graph I want to see. In this case, it's a histogram, which looks like a bar chart. I go to zoom stat to get my initial look, and then maybe I go in and clean up my window settings just a little bit, maybe get rid of some decimals. And there we go.